The silence in the auditorium was absolute, a heavy, crushing weight that pressed down on 1,000 people in dress uniform. Every eye was on my father, Colonel Ramesh Sharma, a man who believed legacy was his birthright. His sneer, the one he had perfected over a lifetime of casual dismissals aimed at me, was gone. In its place was a slack-jawed, hollowed-out shock. The 4-star general standing before him didn't even raise his voice, but his words cracked through the room like thunder. "Colonel," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "your daughter is the most important person in this room." Then, he turned to me, his gaze firm but respectful. "Ma'am," he said, the honorific hanging in the air, a weapon in itself. "Let them see the truth. An hour earlier, I was just trying to be invisible." The reception at the Fort Meade Officers Club was my father's natural habitat, a world of polished brass, stiff spines, and the low murmur of men trading war stories. He was holding court, his voice booming as he bragged about my brother Major Samir Sharma, the family's golden boy, the one who followed the proper path. I stood beside them, a ghost in a business suit, sipping my club soda and trying to project an aura of clerical irrelevance. It was a role I had played for years, and one my family was always happy to let me perform. Then, a quiet man in a tailored suit approached our little circle. I knew him as the Deputy Director of the National Security Agency, a man whose morning brief I personally helped prepare 3 times a week. My father, of course, saw only a civilian who had wandered into the wrong conversation. He intercepted him with a patronizing smile. "Looking for the heroes?" he asked, clapping my brother on the shoulder. "My son Samir is over there, a real soldier." He then gestured dismissively toward me, not even bothering to make eye contact. "This is my daughter, Anya. She pushes papers for the GS Gophers. Data entry, right, sweetie?" The insult was old and worn, a familiar stone in my shoe. But hearing it said to this man, a man who held my Tier 5 security clearance in his hands, was different. A cold dread, sharp and precise, cut through the usual haze of resentment. This wasn't just an insult, it was a catastrophic breach of professional conduct. The deputy director's face remained a polite, unreadable mask, but his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. In that fleeting glance, I saw it all. A silent acknowledgement of the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of my father's ignorance. He knew exactly who I was. My father saw a room full of uniforms and assumed it was his world. He had no idea he was standing in my office, surrounded by my colleagues, and had just belittled me to my own boss. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 lives I was living. To my family, the world was a simple place, divided into the important and the insignificant. My brother, Major Samir Sharma, was important. His recent promotion was the reason for this entire dinner, an event that felt less like a celebration and more like a coronation. The air in my parents' dining room was thick with the smell of roasted lamb and my father's suffocating pride. He stood at the head of the table, a wine glass raised high, his voice echoing with the parade ground authority he never quite left behind. "To Samir," he boomed, a real leader of men, a warrior carrying on the Sharma legacy. Everyone cheered. Samir, to his credit, looked a little embarrassed, but he soaked in the praise like a plant turning to the sun. It was his due after all. He was the son who had done everything right. The West Point ring, the combat infantry badge, the clear, linear path to success that my father could understand and boast about at the club. I watched from the other end of the table, a spectator at my own family gathering. When the applause died down, I cleared my throat, a small tentative sound. "I actually have some good news too," I began. "I received the Director of National Intelligence's Exceptional Service Award last week." A brief, polite silence followed. It was my mother, Anjali, a woman who treated peace and quiet like a sacred text, who spoke first. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her smile gentle but vacant. "Is that, like, Employee of the Month?" The table offered a few polite chuckles. My father, however, just scoffed, waving his hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "It's not a bronze star, Anya," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Real achievement has real stakes. Your brother is out there with his boots on the ground. You're in a cubicle." And just like that, My moment was over. The conversation flowed back to Samir, leaving my award to dissolve into the background noise, another forgotten data point in the long history of my insignificance. They had long ago given me a nickname, one they thought was affectionate. The librarian, they called me. It was their way of explaining my quiet nature, my love for books and analysis, my choice to pursue a doctorate instead of a commission. To them, it meant I was safe, predictable, and ultimately unimportant. A footnote in the grand military epic of the Sharma family. They saw a quiet woman who dealt with dusty files, never imagining the secrets those files contained. They had absolutely no idea what I really did in that cubicle. The world they saw and the world I lived in were separated by a chasm of silence and security clearances. My world wasn't a warm, loud dining room, it was a skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility, a place of absolute silence, chilled to a steady 65 degrees by the hum of servers that held the nation's darkest secrets. There were no family photos on the walls, no windows, just the cold blue-white glow of monitors reflecting in the polished surface of a massive briefing table. And in that room, I was not the librarian. I was Dr. Sharma, and I was in command. I stood at the head of that table, my voice calm and even, dissecting signals intelligence from a hostile state. On a holographic screen before me, a dozen faces stared back, colonels, admirals, and on a primary feed, General Thompson himself. They weren't looking at me with condescension, they were listening with the focused intensity of people whose decisions could cost lives. The adversary's communication pattern is a deception, I stated, pointing to a cascading string of code on the main screen. The surge in chatter here is designed to draw our attention, but the real threat is a ghost signal, a dormant malware package embedded in their satellite's command code. Operation Nightfall, as planned, will trigger it. I brought up another window, a complex threat matrix I had built over 72 sleepless hours. The conclusion was stark, printed in blood-red text. The probability of a catastrophic failure, the complete loss of our primary surveillance asset in the region, is 92.7%. The silence in the skiff was now absolute. Millions of dollars and months of planning were on the line, but no one questioned my findings. They had learned to trust my data. It was General Thompson's voice that finally cut through the tension, patched in from the Pentagon, crisp and decisive. Dr. Sharma, your analysis is the linchpin. We're scrubbing the mission based on your brief. He paused, and for a moment I felt the immense weight of his trust. Stand by to advise on the countermeasure. In that world, my intellect was a weapon. My analysis was the shield. My word, the word of the woman my father dismissed as a paper pusher, had the power to stop an entire military operation in its tracks. No one called me the librarian here. They called me director. I remember my mother pulling me into the kitchen after that disastrous dinner. She wrung her hands, her face etched with a familiar, gentle apology. "You know how your father is, Anya," she whispered, as if the walls might overhear our dissent. "He comes from a world of black and white, of salutes and parades. He just doesn't understand all this computer stuff." She put a hand on my arm, her touch meant to be comforting. "Just let him be proud of Samir. His accomplishments are so much easier for people to see." I just nodded. What else was there to do? I had spent my entire life making myself smaller to accommodate my family's narrow view of the world. I was the quiet one, the boring one, the one who didn't make waves. I was the invisible child, hiding the most powerful parts of myself so that others could feel comfortable. For years I had accepted their narrative. I kept my world separate to keep the peace. But peace is not the same as respect. My father only understood one language, protocol. So I decided it was time I spoke to him in the only language he was fluent in. As I walked away from my father and his oblivious laughter, the deputy director's quiet, knowing glance felt like a key turning in a lock. For years I had absorbed these casual dismissals, letting them settle inside me like silt. But this time was different. The insult hadn't just been personal, it had been a professional liability, a clumsy intrusion of his world into mine. A familiar, hot anger began to rise, but then it cooled, hardening into something else entirely. a cold, diamond-hard resolve. There would be no tearful confrontation in the hallway. There would be no more desperate attempts to explain my life to a man who refused to listen. A correction was in order. A public one. The upcoming retirement ceremony suddenly came into sharp focus. It was more than just an event. It was a temple dedicated to the very system my father had worshipped his entire life. A world of hierarchy, protocol, and the undeniable weight of public recognition. He understood rank. He understood citations read from a stage. He understood the deference one gives to a person of authority. The answer was so obvious, so beautifully simple. The agenda for the ceremony included a special citation for the successful completion of Operation Nightfall. The system itself would be the instrument of my vindication. I wouldn't have to say a word. I found a quiet alcove, away from the noise of the reception, and pulled out my secure work phone. I scrolled to a familiar name, General Thompson's aide-de-camp, a sharp young captain I'd worked with on the Nightfall briefings. He answered on the first ring. I kept my voice level and professional, a project lead confirming logistics. I asked him to verify the sequence for the award segment and the protocol for civilian commendations. I didn't ask for any changes, any special treatment, or any favors. I just needed to confirm the details, and to ensure that the VIP seating arrangements for my father and brother were still confirmed, front and center. The plan was a study in minimalism. The captain confirmed the citation would praise the work of the operation's civilian strategic director. I could already picture it perfectly. My father and brother would hear those words and scan the rows of dignitaries, searching for some gray-haired political appointee. It would never, not in a million years, occur to them that the title referred to me, to the quiet daughter they'd nicknamed the librarian. The trap required no bait, only their own deeply ingrained assumptions and magnificent arrogance. My only move was to ensure they had the best possible view for when the truth finally took the stage. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Across the crowded room I could see them, my father and my brother, laughing with a 2-star general, completely at home. They were so sure of their place in this world, so comfortable in their importance. They had no idea they were no longer guests at someone else's ceremony. They were now attendees at mine. The invitations had made them feel important. The front row seats had made them feel superior. They had no idea they were entering my world by my invitation to witness an authority they couldn't comprehend. The auditorium was a breathtaking spectacle of military precision. A vast, endless sea of dress uniforms, perfectly ordered by rank and service, sat beneath the watchful gaze of flags that hung, silent and heavy, from the rafters. The air itself felt disciplined, smelling of floor polish and starched fabric. From my seat several rows back I watched my father and my brother Samir. They were in the second row, spines straight, exuding an aura of absolute belonging. They were in their element, 2 generations of military pride, perfectly at home. As my father glanced back, his eyes swept past me, and for a moment he offered a small, pitying smile. It was a look I knew well, the one reserved for the quiet civilian daughter who simply didn't belong in his world of consequence. I just gave a slight nod and turned my attention to the stage. The ceremony began with the familiar solemn notes of the national anthem, followed by a procession of speeches that blurred into a comfortable drone of platitudes and acknowledgments. I felt a sense of serene detachment, as if watching a film I had seen many times before. I knew the rhythms of these events, the cadence of the speakers, the polite, measured applause. For my father and brother, this was the pinnacle of existence. For me, it was simply the backdrop for the final act of a play I had quietly set in motion. I smoothed the lapels of my simple, dark business suit, a stark island of black in a sea of decorated blue and green. I felt calm. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Then General Thompson approached the podium. A hush fell over the room. The general was a man who commanded respect not just with the 4 stars on his shoulders, but with a quiet, unshakable gravity. He didn't read from his notes. He scanned the audience, his gaze sweeping across the room before he began to speak. He spoke of a new kind of battlefield, one fought not with bullets and bombs, but with data and deception. He talked about the unseen warriors who stand guard in the silent, digital trenches of the modern world. I saw my father and Samir lean forward, their professional curiosity piqued. This was a language they understood, a story of conflict and courage that resonated with their very bones. The general's voice grew more intense as he began to recount the story of a recent averted crisis, Operation Nightfall. He spoke in broad, unclassified strokes, but his words painted a vivid picture of a nation brought to the brink of disaster, saved at the 11th hour by a brilliant, audacious strategy. He spoke of the lives that were never lost, of the catastrophe that never happened, all because of the foresight of one individual. My father was completely engrossed, nodding along with the general's points, a look of grim professional respect on his face. He was listening to a story about a hero, never once imagining that hero was his own daughter. This entire operation, the general boomed, his voice filling every corner of the vast hall, was architected and led not by a soldier, but by a brilliant strategist, our civilian director for strategic threats. The title hung in the air, heavy with importance. I watched as my father and brother immediately began scanning the VIP section. Their eyes swept over the senior dignitaries, the political appointees, the older, distinguished-looking men who must surely hold such a powerful position. Their gazes passed right over me, their daughter, the librarian, without a flicker of recognition. I was invisible to them, just as I had always been. The thought brought not pain, but a deep, satisfying sense of irony. The general let the suspense build for a moment longer. He looked out over the crowd, letting them wonder. Then, he looked directly into the middle distance, right at me. Her intellect and moral courage under extreme pressure saved thousands of lives, and it is my distinct honor to ask her to stand and be recognized. He paused, and in that heartbeat of silence, the entire world seemed to stop. Dr. Anya Sharma, a single, brilliant spotlight cut through the dim auditorium and found me. The light was blinding, and for a moment all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. 1,000 heads turned as one, a rustling wave of fabric and curiosity. The sea of uniforms turned to face the small, dark island. I saw Samir's face, his jaw slack, his eyes wide with a look of pure, uncomprehending shock. Then I looked at my father. I watched his face cycle through a lifetime of emotions in 5 seconds, from condescending pride, to confusion, to denial, and finally to a pale ashen horror as the truth slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. I rose slowly to my feet, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. As I did, General Thompson stepped down from the stage and began walking directly toward me. It was in that moment that my father, utterly bewildered, his world tilting off its axis, muttered the words just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "What is this? You don't belong with the important ones." The general stopped. He didn't raise his voice, but his focus narrowed on my father with the intensity of a laser. "Colonel," he said, his voice cutting through the whispers, "your daughter is the most important person in this room." He then turned to me, his expression softening with profound respect. "Ma'am," he said clearly, the honorific a sharp, stunning rebuke to my father. "Let them see the truth." He offered me his arm. Then, the applause started. It wasn't polite. It was a thunderous, rolling ovation, and as I took the general's arm I saw the most incredible thing. My father, a creature of pure, lifelong military conditioning, was forced to his feet by the standing ovation. His body, reacting faster than his shattered mind, did what it was trained to do in the presence of overwhelming authority. He snapped to a rigid, involuntary posture of attention. He wasn't honoring his daughter. He was reacting to a display of power he could not deny, and the public humiliation was absolute, silent, and crushing. He was a statue, frozen in the spotlight of my moment. My father had spent my entire life teaching me the importance of rank. In the end, it only took the word "ma'am" for him to finally learn who outranked who. As the thunder of the applause finally subsided, I found myself standing not in the empty space where my family had been, but in the center of a warm, solid circle of my peers, the men and women I fought alongside in the silent digital war. There were no grand pronouncements, just quiet nods of profound respect and a few knowing smiles. The deputy director of the NSA, the man my father had so carelessly dismissed, came over and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. His eyes were kind, but held the weight of the secrets we shared. "Anya," he said, his voice low and sincere, "we've always known. I'm just glad they do too." It was a simple statement, but it was everything. It was the validation I had spent a lifetime searching for, offered freely by people who had judged me on my work alone. I didn't have to look for my father and brother to know they were gone. I could feel their absence. They hadn't stayed to congratulate me, nor to confront me. They had simply vanished, slipping out a side exit like ghosts who had been exposed to the light. I felt no sting of abandonment, no lingering bitterness. Their retreat was a confession in itself, an admission that they could not exist in a world where I was powerful. They had seen the truth, and unable to reconcile it with their own narrative, they had chosen to flee. Their absence wasn't a wound, it was a quiet, clean closure, the final silent severing of a tie that had only ever held me down. I was no longer a disappointing satellite in their orbit. I was my own center of gravity. The seasons changed, and the silence from my family stretched from days into weeks, then months. The quiet didn't feel empty, it felt peaceful. I moved into a new office, one with a view of the Washington Monument in the distance. The door was heavy oak, and on it was a simple, polished brass nameplate that held more weight than any metal my father owned. It read, "Dr. Anya Sharma, Deputy Director, National Threat Assessment Center." I had earned this. Not through legacy or name, but through long nights, hard data, and the quiet, relentless pursuit of the truth. It was a legacy I had built for myself, one line of code at a time. My mornings were different now. I was the one standing at the head of the primary brief in the Pentagon's command center. The faces on the secure video screens were the most powerful in the nation, and they were all turned to me. I saw General Thompson's familiar, steady gaze among them. 6 months ago, he had been my champion, the one who pulled me onto the stage. Now, he was one of the senior leaders, listening intently, his pen poised. As I delivered my assessment of the global threat landscape, the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just a key analyst anymore. I was a voice that shaped national policy. My authority, once a secret, was now the foundation of my day. The team I built at the center became my true family. A group of brilliant, eccentric, and fiercely loyal analysts who communicated in a rapid-fire shorthand of acronyms and shared inside jokes. Our bond wasn't forged by blood or obligation, but in the crucible of late-night crises and the shared pressure of our work. We celebrated breakthroughs with a quiet round of coffee from the good machine, and supported each other through failures with an unspoken understanding. It was a family built on mutual respect and intellectual rigor, a support system that didn't require me to shrink any part of myself to fit in. Here, my expertise was my value, full stop. Then one evening, as I was reviewing overnight intelligence traffic, my personal phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in half a year. Dad, a ghost from another life. It was a text message, short and stripped of all his usual bluster. It said, "Anya, I was wrong, I am sorry. Can we talk?" I stared at the words, letting them sink in. The message that, for 20 years, I would have given anything to receive. The apology I had craved. The acknowledgement I had so desperately needed. I searched for the old feelings, the familiar sting of hurt, the rush of anger, the desperate childish hope for his approval. But I found nothing. There was no triumph, no desire to write back a sharp, cutting reply. There was only a calm, profound, and unshakable distance. The apology wasn't for me, it was for him. A way to ease his own conscience. To try and rebuild a bridge to a shore I had long since departed. The peace he was seeking from me, I had already found for myself, in his absence. His validation was no longer a currency I dealt in. With a quiet tap of my thumb, I archived the message. I didn't delete it. It was a part of my history, a data point from a mission that was over. I put the phone down, face down, and turned my chair back to the glowing crisis map on the main screen. My focus returned to the intricate web of threats and opportunities that spanned the globe. My work was waiting. My father believed a legacy was something you inherit. I learned a true legacy is something you build in silence. and have acknowledged in public. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.